There is a scene in Fried Green Tomatoes so quietly powerful that test audiences reportedly sat in stunned silence before breaking into applause. It involves a parking lot, a car, and a middle-aged woman finally snapping under the weight of years of being overlooked. That moment became one of the most celebrated scenes of 1991, and it almost didn't make the film at all. Fried Green Tomatoes was dismissed by some studio executives as a picture with limited commercial appeal. Instead, it earned nearly $120 million worldwide and launched conversations about identity, friendship, and hidden history that are still happening today. Let's start with number 15. Number 15. The novel that almost stayed on the shelf, Fried Green Tomatoes, began as a novel called Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, written by Fannie Flagg and published in 1987. Flagg spent years trying to get the book published before it finally found a home at Random House. The story drew heavily from her own Alabama childhood and from real people she had known, including a woman who ran a small cafe and whose life had genuinely shaped how Flagg understood courage and friendship. Hollywood moved slowly on the adaptation. Studios were hesitant about a story driven almost entirely by women, particularly older women, at a time when the industry's attention was fixed on male-driven action properties. Producer and director John Avnet championed the project most persistently and kept it alive through years of development uncertainty. Flagg co-wrote the screenplay alongside Carol Sobieski. Sobieski passed away before the film's release, and Flagg completed the final draft herself. The fact that the author shaped the screenplay meant the film remained unusually faithful to the emotional core of the source material, even as certain story elements were adjusted for the screen. It was a difficult road from page to production, but the persistence paid off. Number 14. The friendship that made Kathy Bates say yes. Kathy Bates had just won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Misery when she was offered the role of Evelyn Couch. By Hollywood's typical logic, a newly crowned Oscar winner would be chasing leading roles in major prestige productions. Bates read the screenplay and connected immediately with the emotional honesty of Evelyn's journey instead. In interviews, Bates has spoken about how rarely she encountered scripts that took the inner life of an ordinary, unglamorous middle-aged woman seriously. Most roles offered to her were supporting parts or genre villains. Evelyn Couch was neither. She was a full human being experiencing a genuine awakening, and Bates recognized that as material worth pursuing regardless of its scale. Her instinct proved correct. Critics singled out Bates's performance as one of the warmest in the film, and her comedic timing in scenes like the parking lot confrontation gave the movie some of its most joyful moments. Bates later reflected that Fried Green Tomatoes reminded her that the size of the role mattered far less than the truth inside it. Number 13. Jessica Tandy's remarkable late-career momentum. Jessica Tandy was 82 years old when she filmed Fried Green Tomatoes, playing Ninny Threadgoode. What makes this remarkable is the context. Tandy had only just won her first Academy Award 2 years earlier for Driving Miss Daisy at the age of 80, making her the oldest Best Actress winner in Oscar history at that time. Rather than slowing down, Tandy was busier and more in demand than she had been in decades. Her career had included extraordinary stage work, including the original Broadway production of A Streetcar Named Desire in 1947, but Hollywood had taken decades to catch up with her. Fried Green Tomatoes arrived during a brief and glorious final chapter in which audiences were finally discovering her on screen. Tandy brought genuine warmth and lived-in wisdom to Ninny that no amount of scripting could manufacture. John Avnet later said that her presence on set raised the emotional temperature of every scene she appeared in. Her scenes with Kathy Bates had the natural ease of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, which by all accounts they did. Number 12. Mary Stuart Masterson's physical commitment to Idgie. Mary Stuart Masterson prepared for the role of Idgie Threadgoode with a level of dedication that went beyond what the script strictly required. Idgie was someone who spent her life outdoors, fishing, running through the Alabama countryside, surviving on instinct and stubbornness. Masterson worked with a dialect coach on an authentic Alabama accent and developed the physical ease and confidence the character demanded. One element she found particularly meaningful was the film's portrayal of Idgie as a person who refused to be confined by the social expectations placed on women in the 1920s and 30s. The cast and director worked carefully to ensure Idgie felt like a fully realized individual rather than a symbol. The charming scenes in which Idgie reaches into a wild hive and emerges covered in bees while remaining perfectly calm required coordination with professional beekeepers on set. Masterson participated directly, and the bees on screen were real. The sequence became one of the film's most visually arresting moments and communicates everything essential about Idgie's character in a single, wordless image. Number 11. The subtext the studio kept at arm's length, Fannie Flagg's novel, was considerably more explicit than the film about the romantic nature of the relationship between Idgie and Ruth. Readers understood that the two women were in love, and Flagg drew on her own experiences as a gay woman in the South in crafting that relationship's emotional texture. When the film was developed, Universal Pictures made a deliberate decision to soften and ambiguate the romantic dimension of their bond. What appears on screen is an intensely close and deeply loving friendship, but the film stops short of presenting it as explicitly romantic. Flagg has discussed this compromise openly, acknowledging the commercial and cultural pressures of the early 1990s that made studios reluctant to market a mainstream film around a same-sex love story. The decision frustrated some viewers and critics who felt important material was being sanitized. Others argued the film's emotional warmth was powerful enough to communicate the depth of the relationship regardless. Later generations of viewers have largely read the relationship as romantic, and the film is now frequently cited as an early example of queer storytelling in mainstream American cinema. Number 10. Whistle Stop was built from the ground up the fictional town of Whistle Stop. Alabama, with its dirt roads, wooden storefronts, and the iconic cafe, did not exist before the film. Production designer Barbara Ling and her team constructed the entire town from scratch on location in Juliet, Georgia, a small community with a landscape and existing railroad infrastructure that matched what the story required. The production didn't simply dress an existing street. Entire storefronts were built, aged, and weathered to convincingly represent a small southern community across several decades. The construction required careful attention to period-accurate architectural details, signage and materials spanning from the 1920s through to the 1940s. Juliet underwent a quiet transformation after the film's release. Tourists arrived wanting to visit the filming location, and a real cafe near the shoot site began operating under the Whistle Stop Cafe name, becoming a genuine local attraction. The town, built entirely for the screen, created a real-world legacy and a community that had no original connection to the story at all. Number 9. The director's unusual dual role, John Avnet, is primarily known as a producer, with credits spanning decades of film and television. Fried Green Tomatoes was one of his relatively rare directorial efforts, and he pursued it with the intensity of someone who had a personal stake in the material. Avnet has spoken about the challenge of managing a story that moved between two distinct time periods: the present-day nursing home scenes with Bates and Tandy, and the historical whistle-stop sequences with Masterson and Mary-Louise Parker. Keeping the emotional logic consistent across those timelines while managing the tonal variety between comedy, drama, and genuine darkness required constant calibration. He made a deliberate decision to avoid the heavy-handed nostalgia that can weigh down period films. Cinematographer Jeffrey Simpson worked with Avnet to ensure the Alabama of the 1920s and 30s felt alive and tactile rather than prettified. Avnet later reflected that the film's commercial success surprised the studio, but not him. He had believed from the beginning that audiences were hungry for exactly this kind of story. Number 8. The weight of Mary-Louise Parker's portrayal of Ruth Jamison required her to navigate one of the film's most emotionally demanding arcs. Ruth begins the story in quiet suffering, escapes an abusive marriage with Idgie's help, builds a new life, and then dies of cancer while still relatively young. Parker prepared carefully for the scenes depicting Ruth's illness and decline. The makeup and costuming team worked to show the physical progression of her condition honestly without being gratuitous. Parker has noted that she wanted Ruth's dignity to remain intact even in her most diminished moments, a goal that aligned directly with the screenplay's treatment of the character. What Parker brought to Ruth that the script alone could not supply was a quality of luminous patience. Ruth watches the world with attention and care, and her love for Idgie is conveyed through small glances and quiet gestures more than declarations. Parker was in her mid-20s during filming, considerably younger than the character as written, yet she convinced audiences that Ruth possessed the depth of someone who had lived through a great deal and chosen love anyway. Number 7. The barbecue scene and what it really means, one of the film's most darkly comic moments, involves the fate of Frank Bennett, Ruth's abusive ex-husband. The film suggests, in a tone balanced between horror and comedy, that his body was disposed of in a singularly Alabama fashion, cooked and served as barbecue to the investigating sheriff. This plot point, carried over from the novel, gave studio executives pause during development. How do you present something so genuinely macabre in a film otherwise about friendship and warmth without derailing the emotional tone? John Avnet's solution was to treat the revelation with exactly the deadpan, matter-of-fact, Southern storytelling logic the novel uses. The crime is presented not as horror, but as justice, and the audience is invited to agree. The fact that audiences largely did agree, and laughed and cheered, says something interesting about the film's moral universe. Fried Green Tomatoes is, among other things, a story about what communities do to protect their own when official systems fail. The barbecue scene is the most extreme expression of that theme, and the fact that it works without feeling exploitative is a genuine achievement of tone, writing, and performance. Number 6. The music that anchored the story the film's score was composed by Thomas Newman, still relatively early in a career that would go on to include multiple Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations. Newman's approach was rooted in acoustic simplicity, instruments and textures that evoked the rural American South without resorting to musical clicks. The score moves between light, playful passages during Evelyn's awakening scenes and something considerably more tender and aching in the sequences dealing with Ruth's illness and death. Newman has discussed the challenge of composing for a film with such tonal range. Comedy and grief occupy the same story, sometimes the same scene, and the music had to honor both without collapsing the distinction. The soundtrack also incorporated period-appropriate blues and gospel influences, grounding the historical sequences in their actual musical moment. The combination of Newman's original score and carefully chosen period music helped the film maintain its sense of place and time across the decades it covered, and the score was recognized as one of Newman's early signature achievements. Number 5. The parking lot scene and a standing ovation the scene in which Evelyn responds to two young women stealing her parking space by repeatedly ramming their car, then cheerfully explaining "I'm older and I have more insurance," became one of the most quoted moments in the film. What is less widely known is that the car impacts were real, not simulated through editing or visual effects. Logistics of safely staging repeated vehicle collisions required close collaboration between the stunt department and the camera crew. Kathy Bates has spoken about the exhilaration of filming that sequence, describing it as one of the most purely enjoyable days she spent on the production. Test screenings confirmed what Avnet had believed. The scene landed with enormous force, particularly with women who had spent years absorbing similar small indignities in daily life. Some test screening audiences reportedly applauded spontaneously at the punchline. The moment works because it is funny, but also because it is deeply earned. Evelyn's entire arc has been building toward exactly this kind of release, and the parking lot delivers it with perfect comic timing. Number 4. How the film handled race and history. The film's treatment of its black characters was both praised and criticized. Those who praised it pointed to Tyson's commanding performance and the film's willingness to show the violence and injustice of segregation-era Alabama directly. Critics who raised concerns argued that the film centered white characters as the agents of moral resolution, with black characters positioned primarily as recipients of white protection rather than fully autonomous protagonists. Flagg has addressed this tension in interviews, noting that the novel was also built on the perspective of its white characters. The debate the film generated about how mainstream Hollywood stories engage with Southern racial history was substantive and has continued among scholars and critics. The film's willingness to include the material at all was notable for a mainstream studio production of its era, even if its treatment remained imperfect by later critical standards. Number 3. The budget. The box office and the surprise fried green tomatoes was produced on a budget of approximately $11 million, modest even by 1991 standards. Universal Pictures approved the project but did not consider it a tentpole release. It was positioned as a prestige drama with limited commercial expectations. The film opened in limited release in late December of 1991 to qualify for awards consideration, then expanded into wide release the following January. Word of mouth among adult audiences, particularly women over 35, a demographic Hollywood chronically underserved, drove the film to exceptional staying power. It did not open explosively, but it kept drawing audiences for weeks. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had earned approximately $82 million in North America and around $119 million worldwide, a return of more than 10 times its production budget. Where film studio executives had debated greenlighting at all, the result carried a clear message: stories about women, told with intelligence and emotional honesty, could find an enormous audience. The lesson, as so often happens in Hollywood, was not absorbed as quickly as it should have been. Number 2. The awards season that almost rewarded the film Fried Green Tomatoes arrived at awards season with genuine momentum. Bates and Tandy delivered performances critics recognized as among the best of the year. The screenplay was intelligent and emotionally rich, and the box office success demonstrated real popular appeal, always a factor in how awards campaigns gain traction. The film received 2 Academy Award nominations, one for the adapted screenplay by Fannie Flagg and Carol Sobieski, and attention in supporting categories. Though the film's acting nominations did not ultimately materialize at the Oscar level despite widespread critical appreciation. The absence of acting nominations for Bates and Tandy in particular struck many observers as a significant oversight. Both the Golden Globes and various critics' awards showed consistent appreciation for the performances. The Academy's failure to nominate either actress has been revisited repeatedly by film writers who regard it as one of the more notable acting nomination omissions of the early 1990s. The film deserved more recognition than it received, and the passage of time has only made that clearer. Number 1. The identity mystery at the heart of the story here is the detail that changes how you watch the entire film. The story's central puzzle, who exactly is Ninny Threadgoode, the old woman telling stories to Evelyn in the nursing home, carries a carefully hidden answer that the film plants but never fully confirms. In Fannie Flagg's novel, strong signals suggest that Ninny and Idgie are the same person. Idgie, who spent her life running from convention, may have simply reinvented herself in old age, taking on the persona of a harmless elderly relative as one final act of storytelling and survival. The novel leaves room for this interpretation without closing it entirely. The film inherits this ambiguity and deepens it. In the final scene, Evelyn visits the abandoned whistle stop and discovers a jar of fresh honey left on the grave of Ruth Jamison, the same honey that Idgie, the bee charmer, would have left there. Ninny is standing beside Evelyn at that moment. The implication is breathtaking. The woman telling the stories may be their protagonist herself. The storyteller and the hero are one. What these 15 stories reveal is something the film itself has always known. Fried Green Tomatoes was made against the grain of what Hollywood believed audiences wanted, by people who trusted that honesty, warmth, and a well-told story would be enough. They were right. more than 30 years later. It endures not as a nostalgic curiosity, but as a genuine piece of American storytelling, about friendship that crosses time, justice that exists outside the law, and the extraordinary lives hidden inside ordinary-looking people. If these stories added something to how you see this film, share your favorite moment in the comments below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a great time. There are plenty more stories like these waiting for you.